Hi and welcome to this DCP web tutorial. In today's tutorial we'll be using Blender 2.8 to create this sci-fi city landscape animation. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up Blender and we'll click here on General and then we'll click on the cube and delete that. So select it and then hit the delete key, select the light source and also hit the delete key. If we middle mouse click and just rotate around, so our Y axis is going this way and the X is this way. Let's go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save this document. I'm going to save this Blender file as Sci-Fi City-01. Let's click the save button here. So the first thing we want to do is create these tall buildings. Let's do that first. So let's press Shift A and insert a cylinder. So we have a cylinder here. We'll click on the properties down here and we'll set it to 10 vertices. So it looks like this, right? Nice simple shape like this. Let's click on this cylinder, make sure it's selected, and in the scale on the X we're going to set it to 2. On the scale on the Y we'll set it to 2, and on the Z axis we'll leave it at 1 here. So let's go into edit mode here and we want to select faces here. Select faces. Okay, so let's click on this top face here. It's now been selected and we want to inset it. So select this inset option here and let's zoom in a little bit. You can go from like any of these corners here, it doesn't really matter, but we just want to drag it in a little bit, not too much, about this much. Right, so we've got this little sort of ledge here, and then let's zoom out a little bit. This face is now selected in the middle. We're going to press E to extrude. So press E and then press the Z key. That will lock it on the Z axis, and then we can grow our building up a little bit, right? So we're going to do this in like stages almost. So let's grow it up to about this tall, and you can make your segments as tall or as short as you want. You can really experiment with this yourself. And what we'll do is make our inset face is already selected. That's always going to be selected. Let's drag in again one more time. And we'll try and make it roughly the same sort of thickness as the one below. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. And then we'll press E to extrude, then Z, and grow that one more time. And we're just going to keep doing this until we build this sort of building shape, right? So let's press, let's left click here, drag in a bit more, then press E to extrude, and then Z, and grow that part as well. This one I'm going to grow a little bit taller, maybe something like this. You kind of get the sort of shape of this building. And let's zoom in a bit here. Let's click here, drag in again, and we'll press E to extrude, then Z. We'll grow that piece as well, and then click one more time, E to extrude, Z. We'll grow that bit there as well, and maybe we'll do one. I think that's probably going to be, I think that's going to be good enough, right? That should be fine. Maybe we'll just put one little bit at the top here. So let's just drag it in here. Press E to extrude, and then we'll have a little bit at the top here, like this. Okay, so that's kind of our little sci-fi building done. And let's go back to object mode here. And what we want to do is, basically the way we're going to create this city is we're going to use particles. So this will actually become a particle, and we use a particle simulation to create these buildings randomly across our scene. That's what we're going to do. This is like the quickest way to do this, I would expect. I'm sure there's plenty of other ways, but that's kind of how I figured out how to do this, right? So what we would do is duplicate this building, because we want two, maybe we'll do 3 different colors for the building. So yeah, let's try 3, right? So let's click on this building. Let's name this cylinder building 1. Let's give these objects good names, because later we're going to need to find them. So this is called building 1. Let's click on that, press Shift and D, and then hit the enter key, and then use the move tool and just move this building across a little bit, right? So this is our second building. So let's call this building number 2. And then we'll duplicate this one. So press Shift D again and hit enter. We'll drag this one across a little bit and we'll call this one finally building 3. Okay, let's go to File, Save. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is give these buildings some material. So let's slightly zoom in on these buildings. Let's click on this first one here. And what we'll do is go, so we've got the first building selected here. Let's go into look dev mode here, right? So we'll click on that. That just gives us some temporary lighting, think of it that way. Let's go to the material and we'll click new and double click on building 1, press Ctrl C to copy that text and make this building 1 here, right? Something like this. And then the base color, I'm going to leave it as it is, and the metallic, I'm going to set that all the way up to the top here. Set the metallic all the way up to the top like this, and then the specular leave it at 0.5, and then the roughness I'm going to set it to 0.3. So the building is going to look a bit sort of grayscale like this, or something similar to this, right? Some shiny object, and we'll work on improving that maybe a little bit later. So let's go ahead and click on in fact, what we should do, this building 1, we should call this building main, yeah? So name it building main. This is going to be like the main building material. Let's call it, that's a better name for it. So when we click on the second building and we click down here, we can select building main. So it's going to use the same material, and this one we'll click down here and select building main as well. So all three of these are using the same material, pretty much, right? Nice and simple. And now we want to make some slight modifications so each one of these buildings is unique in some way. So let's click on this first one. Let's just look at it from a sort of top down angle, something like this. Let's get in a bit closer, something like this, yeah? And we'll go into edit mode and we're going to click on one of these faces, any one of these faces here, or on the bottom down here, doesn't really matter. So select one of these faces and make sure that your X-ray is turned off, right? You want to make sure X-ray is turned off here. And click on this face here, then go to, let's see, go to select, where are we? Select similar here, and then we want to use, let's see, normal, select normal here. So what that will do is tell Blender to go and find in this object elements that look similar to that particular panel. You can think of it that way, right? So selected all of these layers going up around the edges, though, only these top parts. And what we want to do is give these top parts a material. So this is building 1 here. This is the main building material. Let's click the plus sign and click new. And this material, we're going to call it building 1 lights. So let's name that building 1 lights. Let's click here on the surface and set it to emission shader. Set the emission to 5 and change the color to maybe like some sort of blue color, right? Some turquoisey sort of blue color. We can play around with the colors later and click the assign. Now you can see that just these circular parts have that particular color, and at the top here, right? So the building will be grey and we've got these circular elements. Let's go back into object mode here and click on the second building, go into edit mode, click on one of those panels again. So select one of these panels down here or anywhere on this object, go to select, go to select similar and normal. Now we're looking at building 2, right? So we'll click the plus sign to add a new material and we'll click new and we'll call that, let's see, building lights 2. And we'll click here, set it to an emission shader, set the emission to 5 for now, and click in here, and blue, maybe we'll go for like a sort of purple color, right? And click assign. So don't worry about these colors, we can modify them later. And we'll go back into object mode, click building number 3, go back into edit mode, and we'll click on the face, go to select, select similar, normal here, and we want to create a new material, so click the plus sign and click new here, and this will be called building light 3, and then click here, go to emission, set it to 5 for now, and choose a different color. So I'm going to go for red, and then click the assign button. So now we've got 3 objects with 3 different colors. Let's go back to object mode here and let's go to File, Save As, and save it as version 2. So just click the plus sign here. Whenever in Blender, if you call it by file name and then put like -01, then the next time you click this plus sign, it will automatically call it -02, and you can just go ahead and click Save here. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is create our land, and let's zoom out here a little bit, and we'll press Shift A and insert a plane here. So we've got a plane here. It's a little bit hard to see, but we've got a plane down here right on top of this, underneath this building, you could say. So let's click on that plane and let's set its size. On the x-axis, we want to set it to 60. So it's going to be very, very wide. And on the y-axis, we're going to set it to 120. It's going to have some distance there, right? Some distance, something like this. And we might replicate this down to fly across this scene, right? Something like this. Now, what we really want to do is click on this plane, press Shift and D to duplicate it, then hit Enter. So now we've got plane here and plane 001. So the first plane, let's call this plane, let's just call this hill lands, right? Because in our scene we've got like these ridges, these bumps in there, sort of in the landscape. So we'll call it hill lands, and this one we'll call this land. Let's call it land building emitter. So we're going to use one of these surfaces to emit the buildings using a particle system, and the other one we're going to use it to create the these sort of mountings or these ridges in our artwork or in our animation. Let's go to File, Save. Okay, so let's click on this first building here and hold down the Shift key and select the other two buildings by left clicking on them. I'm just going to drag them off of the surface here because we want to work on this surface. And for now, really the land building emitter, we don't need to see that, so let's hide it. And let's click on the hill land here. Let's go into edit mode. So let's go to edit mode here, and we're going to right click and subdivide, and we're going to set that value to 10 here. So we've got these little boxes, you can say, right? Let's go back to object mode, and we'll go into our modifier, and we'll add modifier, and we're going to subdivision surface here as well. Let's click on that, and in the render and the viewport, we're going to set it to 3, and then click apply. So when we go back now into edit mode, we're going to see loads of these little boxes. You can see there's there's tons of them, right? And what we want to do is click outside of the object once, and that will deselect everything, right? And we want to click on the vertices option here, vertices. So we want to select vertices on here. So really what we want, best way to do this is press number 7. So you see it right from the top. And we just want to randomly select vertices on this plane. But try not to select ones that are too close to the edge. So you want to be like maybe 5 or 6 of these dots inside when you're selecting. This is kind of my advice what to do. So let's click here, and you'll see maybe we should go into solid view. It's a bit easier to see the dots. So when you go into solid view, they'll be highlighted this sort of orange color, and just hold down the shift key and then just randomly select these dots or these vertices. So try not to follow any sort of pattern, make it all a bit random, and it's going to give you a better result. So I'm just going to go ahead and select some. So something like this. So I haven't selected a huge amount. You can refine that a little bit. You can maybe select one around here, something like that. Something like this should be pretty good. So I'm going to middle mouse click and rotate down like this, so I can see the plane at an angle like this. I want to see it at this sort of angle, and then I'm going to click on here and select proportional editing, and then I'm going to click here and make sure that smooth is selected here. And what I want to do is grab these vertices. So I'm going to press G to grab, and then I'm going to press the letter Z. So G to grab them, then the letter Z, and I'm going to drag up like this. And as I'm dragging up, I'm going to roll my mouse wheel in the downwards direction. So I want to create these hills like this, something like this. And the more if you roll them too far, it's going to smooth out too much. So you want to roll them to a point where you're getting these sort of hill shapes, right? Something like this. Let's see. Somewhere about here should be good. Something like this should be okay. We might actually In fact, there's probably a wiser thing that we should do. Really, we should generate buildings, lay them on top, and then we can work out whether these hills are too large or too small. Because right now we can't really compare them to the. I guess we could move these buildings just as an example. Let's see. Actually, let's do this the right way. Yeah, this is kind of the wrong way to do this. So let's go to let's press Control Z. Let's undo that, and we just left click here. So we've still got our plane here. Everything's set up for the hills layer, and we should really generate our buildings, lay them on top of here, and then select the vertices and then grow these buildings, because it would be wiser to do it that way. So let's go back to object mode. Let's turn off the hill lands and let's turn on the land building emitter. And what we want to do, well, let's click on this land here, this emitter, and we'll go to the particle settings. And the first thing we want to do is really build another collection. So let's right click here and click new collection, and this new collection, let's call this buildings. Can't spell today. Okay, buildings. Let's click on the first one, hold down the shift key and select all three of these buildings in this scene collection here and drag them into this new collection. So this will become our particles, think of it that way. We'll go into, for now, let's go to look dev mode, and we'll click on the land building emitter. Click on the particle options here, and then click on the plus sign. Let's call this, I'm just going to call it buildings, and let's have a think about this, right? So I'm just going to click here quickly, and I'm going to set it to 30 frames a second. Let's set it to 30 frames. Let's go back to the particle system, and we'll set our end to 300. So this animation is going to be 10 seconds long. We might change that right afterwards. In fact, down here we need to set it to 300. Now thinking about this, the start frame, let's think about this a little bit. So the start frame, we want to start this, let's see, we want to start this on frame 1, but we also want to end it on frame 1, because we want all of our buildings to appear on frame 1. We don't want to start, you could have them randomly appear as you're doing whatever you're doing in your animation, but really I want them all to appear at the same time. So I'm going to set the start frame and the end frame to 1. The lifetime, I'm going to set them to 300. So each particle will last at least 300 frames, and that's the whole duration of this animation sequence, right? So these buildings will never disappear, basically. That's what we're trying to do. And then in the velocity, I don't want the buildings to move, so I'm going to set the velocity to 0. And in the field weights, I don't want any gravity, so I'm going to turn the gravity off. Now the buildings will be stuck to this surface, you can think of it that way. And in the render settings, I'm going to go to collection here, and I'm going to select this collection here and click on buildings. Now you can see the buildings, right? But they don't look very good. So what we will do is, let's see, we've got too many, right? First of all, we've got like 1,000, and we need probably like 70 at the most, and maybe a few more, we'll see. And they're too small. These buildings are way too small, so let's set the size here. We want to set the size here. Where's the render setting? So let's increase this to something like 0.6. Now you can see the buildings here. So let's turn off our overlays, and now we can see these buildings appear. And a nice thing about generating the buildings this way is you can go up to here and you can change the amount of buildings quite easily like this. So you can have 5, or you can have over 1,000. You can have 50,000 if you want. If your computer can cope with it, you can do 100,000 buildings. But we want to set it to a sensible number like 70. And then this seed option here allows us to randomly reposition them. So sometimes the objects are just not in the right place, and using this seed option, Sometimes it's quite useful because you can just move all the buildings quite quickly and get it to a place where maybe you want, your camera isn't getting blocked by a building, for example, something like this. So we'll leave the seed probably on 3, something like this. And then let's go over to our render settings here. Let's actually go to File, Save. Okay, so in the render context menu here, we want to enable some of these settings in here. So let's see. Let's first of all turn on ambient inclusion. Let's turn on the bloom, and let's set the bloom to something like around 5.7, something like that, around 5. Let's set it to 5.7, and the intensity I'm going to set it to 0.02 here. And then I want to turn on screen space reflections, open up this option down here, and I'm going to set the trace position all the way down to 0, and then the max roughness I'm going to set that to 0.03 like this, and the edge fade I'll leave it as it is. And in volumetrics I want to set the tile size to 2, and we'll leave the render samples at 64 for now. We might adjust that possibly later, we'll have to see during the render, but let's set our render to 128 samples, and for the now we set the viewport to 128 as well. Let's go to File, Save. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is just set up the camera roughly where we want to position it so we can get a sort of perspective of what our landscape is going to look like. Just click on the camera up here, and really we should set the properties for the camera here. So I want to see a focal length of 20, so it's going to be quite a wide camera, 20 here, and the end clipping I'm going to set that to around 400. So these are the only 2 settings I'm going to put into here, and then I'm going to click on the context menu here, and let's try and get this roughly aligned up, and then we'll press Control Alt and 0. So I'm just looking down the scene right now. We'll press Control Alt 0. Now you can see what the camera sees, and really I want to adjust the camera position. So let's set the X to 0 so it's centered out. We want to see it kind of centered out like this, and really we want to move this camera a bit, right? So I think we need to bring it forward a bit. So let's bring it forward to around 100, and let's set it to like minus 124, something like this. And then definitely want to bring it down, right? So let's set that down to around, let's see, we'll bring it up a bit. We'll set this to around 4.4, I think would be good. So now we're looking down this landscape, and the camera angle I'm going to set this to 88.5, so it's just going to be slightly looking in upwards direction. This is kind of your choice. You could have it looking downwards or upwards. I think around 88.5. We can adjust this when we're doing our animation. We can do a lot of movement in this as well. The Z, we set that to 0, so now it's looking straight down this scene. Now really what we can do is build these hills. Now that we can see the buildings there, it's going to be much easier for us to judge how tall those hills need to be. So we did look at that a little bit before, but we stopped that and we built this part first. Now we can go ahead and build these hills. So let's turn back on the hill lands here. Let's click on it. Wise thing for us to do is go to File, Save first. So what we'll do for now is this land buildings emitter, let's just hide that for the moment. Let's click on the hill lands here. Let's go to edit mode here and press number 7. That takes us back into this top view again, and we want to use vertices here, right? And what we want to do, let's see, edit mode, we need to turn on our overlays, right? So make sure overlays is turned on here. You can't select the vertices correctly otherwise. So hold down the shift key and we can go ahead and reselect these vertices. Again, you want to space them out and have them a bit random, would be wise. This might be a bit easier to see in solid view. I'm just going to do this pretty quick. You can have a few close and a few spaced out. Something like this, just some random sort of selection of these vertices. Let's middle mouse click and rotate down like this. Or in fact, let's press 0 on our keyboard. Press the number 0. Now we can see what the camera sees. And what we want to do is click on this option here to turn the buildings back on. And now our vertices are still selected. So we can press G to grab. So we're going to press, make sure that proportional editing is turned on here. And make sure smooth is set here. Then we can press G to grab. And then Z. And we can grow up our hills here. Look, we can make them taller. And you can use your mouse wheel to rotate them. So you can have them like ridges here. I want them to be something like something like this. So some of the buildings will be buried in these hills. Again, we can use the array options. And this is why I said it was probably better to make the buildings first. Because if you made your hills like this, it's going to be a bit silly, right? It's covering all the buildings. So we want the buildings to be like buried in these hills a little bit. Something like this I think would be good. So I'm going to left click to confirm that. The ridges are not too high. In fact, let's press Ctrl Z. Let's press, so if you don't like that, press Ctrl Z to undo. And then you can press G to grab and then Z. I actually want to make them a little bit taller. Something like, let's see. Something like here. Around here. Almost like halfway up this section here of this building. So I want these mountains or these mounds, let's call them. Let's go back into object mode. And let's go into the look dev. And we'll turn off our overlays. And we kind of get an understanding of what's going on here. So we're getting the shapes of of this land and these buildings placed within this this environment. Now, really, let's see. I'm not sure how we're going to do it. Let's check this. Let's grab these buildings here. Let's see. I don't think it really matters if they're sticking out from the bottom here. I don't think that's going to be a problem actually, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. Let's press 0 because our camera is quite wide, but you know, I see our landscape is very wide, so we're not going to see these buildings off on the side over here anyway. So I won't worry about if they're sticking through the bottom because we're never going to see that anyway, so it's not a problem. Let's click on building 1 here and go to the material, and we're going to set the strength here to something larger like 50. We want to give them more power, these this glow. So we'll click building 3 and set that to 50 as well, and then we'll click building 2 and building 3 and set them all to 50. Okay, so let's go to file, save as, and let's save this as our next version. So we'll save it as 03. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on our render view here. So now we can see our render view. I want to add a bit more lighting into this scene. Let's press Shift A and insert a sunlight. So we've got this sunlight. Let's drag that up here. It doesn't really matter where it's placed, but we'll drag it up here. And we'll go to the light settings here. And in the color, I want to select some sort of red color. And for the strength, I'm going to set that to about 1.9, something like this. And for the angle, I'm going to set it to 26.5 degrees. And let's see. So that should be pretty good. Let's go to the world settings, and in the color here I want to set it to black, and then I'm going to go over to the shading tab here, and we'll go to the world settings here, and you can see the output and the background. If you can't see these, use your mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and you'll probably find them maybe up here somewhere. So just zoom in on these nodes here. We'll press Shift and A, Shift A, and insert a volume scatter, and let's drag that to the volume here. And we want to set the density to 0.015, and this option here we want to set it to 0.8. Let's go to file, save, and we can go to our render view. Now what we want to do, let's see, let's make sure we got this right. This seems to be okay. What we need to do now is go to the hill land here and click on new material, and let's click new here, and we're going to label that, let's just call it land. And what we'll do is let's see, we will set the base color to something very dark. We want it to be almost not black but almost black color, right? Just off the bottom here, something just off black. and then the metallic we're going to set that all the way up to the top, and then the specular we'll leave that all the way up to the top as well, and then the roughness we're going to set that to 0.09. Okay, let's go to File, Save. Now we need to add a material to this hill land here. So let's go to our object data here, and we can see the land material in here. Let's just middle mouse click so we can get towards the bottom here. And what we want to do is we want to add a bump map, right? So let's press Shift and A, and we'll add a, let's go to vector bump here, and then we'll press Shift and A again, and we want to add a texture which will be a wave texture. Let's connect the color to the height here, and then the normal to the normal here. And what we want to do is set the scale to 2.2, and we'll set the distortion to 4.7, and we'll set the detail to 15, and then the detailed scale we'll set that to 5, and we'll pretty much leave these options as they are. The rest of it we can play around with that maybe a little bit later, but for now we're going to leave that pretty much as it is. We should now go to File, Save As, and we'll save this as version 5 and click Save. Okay, so a couple of quick things we need to do. First of all, when we added that sun object into the scene, it got added into this collection called buildings, and this is where we was generating our particles, right, the buildings themselves, and it's also generating multiple versions of that sun. So what we need to do is click on the sun and drag it into the top collection. Now you can see a much bigger difference here, right? We also need to click on the land building emitter here, and we need to click on this drop down and select the land material for that as well, and we're going to see a much bigger difference to the scene as well. So we're getting closer to what I think is something that looks pretty good. Really want to add a bit more lighting into this, I think, as well, and maybe we'll try and improve the some of this materials or textures inside of here, but it's getting close to what I like. So let's go back to our layout view here. We can just zoom in here a little bit and we get a bit of an idea of what's going on. Let's press F12 to render, and let's just render out one frame. We can see what it looks like, and then we can maybe make a decision on how to improve that. Okay, so overall I think it's looking pretty cool. It's quite sci-fi, quite different. I like the sort of the dark elements of it as well, and I like the way the buildings are faded into the background. So that's pretty cool. So what we'll do is go to File, Save, and we want to add a light source to this particular scene. Okay, so what I want to do is add a spotlight to this scene. So I'm going to press Shift and A, press Shift A, go down to light, and then add a spotlight here. So the light is right down here somewhere. So let's click on the object data here, and we'll set the y-axis, or the y location should I say, to -66, and we'll set the z-axis here, or the z location, to 6.2, something like that. That's just going to position it sort of in the middle, but in the far distance, you can see over here. And then we want to set the rotation to probably about -80 or -90. Let's try -80. Now that light source is pointing towards the camera, it's in the far distance, which is really where we want it to be. So the next thing we want to do is just change the light settings itself. So let's go ahead and pick maybe, like, we're using red in the overall scene, so I want to use something like maybe like a quite a dark orange color, and we'll set the power. We need to crank this right up, right? So let's try around 2000. Now you can see the light source here. Let's set that even higher. I want to set it to something like 5000. That's kind of what I want. I want this bright light, almost like a sun in the background, or some sort of alien thing going on here, and you'll get these nice lights, or like these shards of light coming off here. You'll get this is the volumetric lighting doing its work, right? And you'll get all these nice reflections off of this ground, because we added a material to this ground, right? That's what's giving this scene that sort of look and feel. And the only other thing I'll probably do here is maybe go to our land emitter here, click on the particle settings, and either increase the amount. So you can just click here, increase the amount, and just try and get the buildings in a kind of in a situation where they look good. So I think these one, really I want one that's a little bit closer. So you can just shift through the seeds here and find some sort of layout of buildings that looks pretty cool. So maybe something like this. This looks pretty cool, right? Let's click on the overlays. Let's turn the overlays off. We'll turn them back on. So let's click on the this spotlight here. We need to drag this out of this collection. So we need to drag it to the main collection at the top here. So make sure it sits in this main collection at the top, and maybe we'll click on the land emitter, and we can kind of get to see what this looks like. Let's see. Let's click on building 1. That's right over here somewhere. So you can probably still see that. In fact, let's press 0 on our keyboard. Let's zoom out a little bit. So these buildings will probably get displayed in our render. So let's click, let's zoom right out a bit. Let's hold down the shift key, click building 1, 2 and 3. They're right over here in the distance. And let's just drag them all the way over to here on the right hand side out of the scene. And then we can click and zoom in a bit and get an idea of what our sort of landscape looks like. So the only disadvantage, I guess, of using particles to generate these buildings is you can't really specifically say where they're going to be placed. That's the only disadvantage. The advantage is that you can generate thousands of them quite quickly, right? And you can have many different versions of the buildings. So the 3 buildings that we made, they didn't have to all be the same height or even the same style. There could have been completely different styles of building. Inside the particle system here, you can select pick random, and then it's just going to randomly generate and pick a different sort of color for each building. We just randomly pick them. So some will be purple, some will be red, some I think we made orange. I can't remember exactly the colors. Let's just check because they look pretty similar. We've got blue, purple and orange, right? So those are the 3 colors that we have. So really you can go and experiment with this now, and you can create completely different color schemes quite quickly just by changing the light sources. So for example, this sunlight in the background here, or the spotlight should I say, let's click on that. If we click on this orange and change it, then we can have like this sort of alien green and do like purples. You can really play around with the settings in here and get some really cool effects. So it's down for you to go and experiment with. I think I'm going to leave it sort of reds and oranges. I kind of like this sort of style. Let's press Control S to save, and let's press F12, and let's just see what this scene looks like now. I think it's getting very close to what we want before we do a little bit of sort of, maybe we do a bit of animation work, right? So that looks pretty cool. I don't know what you think. I kind of like the gritty sort of stone sort of effect here. I like the way the light is shimmering off of this stone, and you can play around with the settings, and you can experiment with the settings inside the render settings here inside here. So you can play around with the screen space reflections here, right? You can change the trace position, and you can change the roughness, and you can also change the edge fading to affect the way that this looks. You can turn off half tracing as well, and you're going to get different effects. You've got to experiment with this, so you've got to try and make it your own. So let's go to File, Save. Another thing you can do is go into the shading here. You can click on the land hill here and make sure object is selected. And a nice thing to experiment with is to disconnect this wave texture. So you can disconnect this one. Now you've got kind of like a sort of black hill scene. This looks pretty cool as well, I think. I quite like the way that this looks as it is, just with the black hills and the silhouettes of the buildings in the background. That's pretty cool as well. But we'll press Shift A and we'll go to texture, and you can add something like a Musgrave texture, and then you can drag the color to here as well, to the height, and then you can change that, and you can get a different sort of effect. So you can play around with these different textures to see what looks good. You can get some quite dramatic changes and effects to the way that this is all rendered out, right? So it's down for you to experiment with. Play around with these textures. This is quite a good way to learn how these work, or what sort of effect they're going to have in your scene, is just by adding them to this node here. So we can get rid of this one. Maybe we'll delete that. This is kind of the one I'm going to keep, but let's go back in here. Let's go to the textures option here, and we've got noise texture in here. Let's drag the color to the height here, and then we can scale that noise texture. We can generate noise here and get detail or smooth it out. You can play around with the settings, and then you can get sort of different style of rock here, right? So this rock effect. This one looks pretty cool as well, but I think we'll stick with our wave texture here. This one I quite like. Let's go to File, Save As, and let's try and plan out a basic sort of animation of what this scene might look like. We might fly through it a little bit and maybe do some particles or something as well, just to finish off this this tutorial. Okay, so let's finish off our work and let's create some camera movement. Let's do that animation sequence and maybe we'll add some particles and do a few other little bits as well. So let's click on the layout here and let's click on our render view. If you don't have that showing, this is our render view, and let's zoom out slightly here. So we're looking at the camera. Our camera is in actually a very good position, so it's worth setting that up at the beginning. And what we want to do is do our animation. So let's click on the record button here, and we need to click on the camera. So let's click on the camera because that's what we're going to be working with, and we're going to move to frame. In fact, what we'll do is click on the context here and then press the letter I here, and press the letter I here as well. So we insert keyframes when we press the letter I for the location and the rotation. We're going to move to frame 60. So move to frame 60 and then hit the letter I again on both of them. So we insert keyframes for the location and rotation on the first frame and on frame 60. Let's click this button here and that takes us right back to the first frame. And what we want to do is let's think about this. So really we want to move our camera forwards. So we're going to basically at the beginning of our animation the camera is actually going to move backwards, and then we're going to move backwards and then move forwards afterwards, I think, something like this. So I want to move quite close to this object in front of me, something like around here, something like this, and we'll leave the height as it is because I think the height is pretty good, and we want to rotate this a little bit. So let's go ahead and rotate it maybe about 25 sort of degrees, something around 25. Left click here, drag across and rotate it, right? Let's set it to 27 degrees. So this is the sort of starting angle, but really what I want to do is use the focus distance. So the camera is selected. I'm going to click on the camera options here for the camera itself, and depth of field I want to turn that on, and then click this drop down menu, and then on the focus distance I'm going to press the letter I to insert a keyframe here. I'm going to use this button here to jump to the next keyframe, which is on frame 60, or move the timeline to frame 60 and press the letter I here again as well. And I'm going to click on this button here to move back to the first frame, and I'm going to set the camera focus to 0.14. So now you've got this like blurred out effect, and when we click play the camera is going to move backwards at an angle and then move forwards again as we continue our animation sequence. So I wanted like this sort of blur effect, right, to start off with. So let's go ahead and move to frame, let's say around frame 150, I think would be good. So we want some distance between these frames, and on frame 150 we want to move our camera again. So let's click on the camera, let's go to the object data here, press the letter I to insert a keyframe here, and press the letter I to insert a keyframe here, and we're going to move our camera forwards now, right? So let's move the camera forward to probably around, let's say something like somewhere around here, I think will be good. And we want to bring our camera kind of over the side of this hill. So let's move it this direction. So it's kind of around here, somewhere around here, something like, now this is all down to your preferences, but I'm going to kind of try and swerve around the edge of this building and then towards the middle again. That's kind of what I'm trying to do, and we need to move up because the camera is a bit too low. It's going to end up hitting this rock thing here right below us. So let's set the camera around here, and I think it might be worth rotating maybe again. Let's rotate, let's see, yeah, we'll rotate it this way and then we'll rotate it back on the next move, something around -15. So let's, whenever you're not using the record button, so I mean we can leave it on, but normally I'll turn it off, do whatever I'm doing, and then turn it back on afterwards. So let's go back to the very first frame, click play. We've got a camera blur here, and it moves backwards, and then it's going to swerve towards that building and kind of fly over this little hilltop thing here. And now we can make our next move. So let's hit the record button, and we're going to move to, let's say around, what would be good? Let's move to around, we need some distance here, right? So let's move to around frame 230, I think would be good. Let's move to this position, hit the letter I here, and hit the letter I here. So we're going to insert keyframes for these ones as well. And we're going to move this camera forward some, right? So let's start moving it forward. Let's try and get it into a good place around, let's say, probably around, I want to see this building on the side a little bit. So I think maybe a bit more forward, something like here. So we're pretty close to this building here on the side, and we want to now, let's see, really we'll set this y-axis back to 0, so it's going to rotate back around to the front here, flat again, right? And let's see, we might move this, let's actually swivel the camera a bit as well. I want to see more of this building on the side here. Let's swivel it around to this sort of angle. Let's go back, let's untick the record button and click play. We can just judge whether it looks right or not, and then we can tweak it, but I think it's looking pretty cool. It kind of swerves to this building, then flies over this little hill, then it's going to bend to around here. This sort of position looks good. So from here we've got to move to now frame, let's move to frame, okay, so we haven't got many frames left, so let's go right to the end to frame 300 here, and let's hit the record button again. Let's go to file, save as, and save a new copy of our work, right, before we mess anything up. Okay, so let's hit the letter I here and the letter I here to insert keyframes for these objects here, these two locations and rotations on frame 300, and then we can do our final piece of movement on this. So really what we want to do is move, let's see, let's in fact first of all let's undo that first move. Really we want to, we're going to want to move this camera forward a bit, right? So let's move it forward to around here first, and then let's see, really we want to move it on this X location across here. We want this sort of light in the distance here, maybe around here, around 0.43. I want to see this building in the side. Maybe we'll kind of half cut it, maybe halfway, something like this. I think this is a nice end frame. You can see buildings on the side and got the light source in the background. So let's hit the record button and go back to the first frame and click play. Let's just watch this quickly. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. One other thing I want to do is just add some particles into this system, right? So this is quite interesting, probably for something for you to learn as well. So how to do this, because we're actually going to have two particle systems running, and there's going to be some conflictions. I'm going to show you how to fix that. This is quite an interesting thing about Blender, how we can resolve this particular issue that we're going to face in a moment, right? So what we do is go to frame 60, because frame 60 is quite level. You can see it's all flat, and then we can middle mouse click. And when we middle mouse click once, that takes us out of the camera view, and that's just a nice sort of flat plane to rotate around. And what we want to do first of all is we want to, let's see, we want to insert a sphere. So let's press Shift A and insert a UV sphere. So we've got a UV sphere here, but right now it's put into the buildings collection. So let's grab that and move it to the main collection at the top. And let's just minimize this buildings collection. And let's call this sphere emitter, right? It's going to emit some particles. And we want to place this sphere emitter directly behind the spotlight. So what we'll do is click on the spotlight. You can see the values of the position and the rotation of the spotlight here. We're not too concerned about rotation, but we've got -66 and then 6.2 for the X and for the Y and Z here. So we'll go ahead and click on this sphere emitter and we'll paste this into here and we'll type in 6.2 here. So now you can see our sphere sits exactly where our spotlight is, in exactly the same location, but we don't want it to be exactly the same. We want it to actually be behind. So let's just rotate, and one thing we can do is press the letter N, and when we press the letter N it will open up the transform control panel. We can go to view here and we'll scroll down and we'll lock the view to a specific object, and we're going to lock it to the sphere, which is the sphere emitter. So when we click on that, now we're going to rotate. So let's press the letter N, and now we're going to rotate around this sphere. So when we zoom in, we're zooming onto this object, which just makes it a little bit easier to judge where we're going to move it. So we're just going to click on this green arrow and drag it back so that it sits behind the light source here. You can see this light source. So let's go to File, Save As. Let's save it as a new version, be wise. We're on version 9. You might be on a few less versions because I've been doing a little bit of fiddling around while I've been making this tutorial. So you might be on version 7 or version 6. I'm on version 9, so the versions doesn't matter. Just make sure you're saving your work. And we want to emit some particles from here. So let's go ahead and click on the particle system here, and we'll click new particle system, and let's label this. Let's call it. We're going to call it sphere particles, and we want to, let's get this right. Let's have a look. So what we do is we're going to start the particles on frame 1, end on frame 200, and they're going to last 50 frames maximum. So by the time frame 250, if you see this red line down here, this red line here, this represents how long those particles are going to be visible, and the very last one is going to end on frame 250. So we want to set the lifetime a bit longer so that it roughly ends around frame 290. So we're going to have like 10 frames at the end where there's going to be no particles in the scene. So just adjust this. I've set it to 89 point. Let's round it up to 90 here. And we want in the velocity here. Velocity, let's set it to 0. So set the velocity to 0, and the render settings here. We're going to come back to this in a moment. Actually, let's turn off show emitter, and in the viewport, let's turn off show emitter here as well. And then in the field weights, let's set the gravity to 0. So if we were to click play, let's go back to the first frame. Let's see. We need to turn on our overlays. Yeah, make sure you turn on overlays. Now you can see the particles here, and they're looking, they're pretty much static because we've turned off velocity and we've turned off gravity. So what we want to do now is create 2 collections. And each collection is going to control the particles that we have, because remember we've got 2 types of particles. We've got the buildings and we've got this sphere emitter. So if we start to add force fields into this system, it's going to affect both the buildings and the particles. So let's see that problem happen, and then let's fix it afterwards. So if we were to let's say if we went into here and we press Shift A and we insert a force field and we want a wind force field. Let's click wind, and in the Y here we're going to set it to 6.6, I think it was, and in the Z, no, it was 62. What was it? 66 I think, and 6.6. We'll work that out in a moment. Let's see. Let's click on let's just double check that by clicking on the sphere emitter. Let's go to its settings. So 64 and 62, -64 and 6.2. So let's go back to our, in the buildings, it's probably here, a lot of the field is in the buildings. We don't want it to be there. Let's drag it into the main collection up here. And this field, let's double click on it and call it field wind. So that's what it is. Let's click on that. And my memory is not good today. Sphere emitter -64 and 6.2. So here we'll type in -64 and 6.2. That just, in theory, we didn't need to move this field wind, but I just kind of like it to be sitting right behind the object that's emitting the particles. Just makes sense for me. And then we want to rotate this around. So let's rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees. So now the wind is pointing behind these particles, pushing them towards the camera and through this light source. So if we go to field winds and go to the physics settings here and set it to something like 25 and then click play, let's go back to the first frame and click play. Now you can see the particles are moving, but now you can see another problem. All of our buildings are moving as well. So if you want moving buildings in your scene, then no problem, but we don't want that. So let's fix it so that that doesn't happen. Let's go back to frame 60. Frame 60. Let's go back one frame to frame 60. And then we'll middle mouse click. And we're just going to zoom back in onto our particles here, right? And our emitter. Now, to fix that problem, the reason why it's happening is this field wind is not being specifically isolated to this sphere emitter. So what we need to do is create a collection, put the field wind into that collection, and then assign that collection to the sphere emitter here. So it all makes sense in a moment, but we're going to build two collections. In fact, we'll build one and then I'll show you the problem afterwards. I'd like to explain what's going on and then explain how to fix it. So let's fix the first problem. Let's right click here at the top scene collection and click new, and that creates this new collection. And in here we're going to call this particle, P-A-R-T-I, particle, let's call it particle fields. And then we'll drag this field wind into the particle fields here. So now it sits inside here. We can minimize this building one. We don't need to show up. So here we've got field winds inside the particle fields. Let's click on, let's actually call this, let's call this sphere. Let's call it sphere particle fields because then we can recognize it against this. So let's click on the sphere emitter. Let's go to its settings, and then in the field weights, effector collection down here, we need to select sphere particle fields like this. Now, in theory, we should still see the same problem. We can still see both moving, right? Now what we need to do is create another collection and assign that to the buildings. So let's right click up here again, click new, and in this one here we're going to call it buildings fields, and we'll go to our buildings land emitter, go to its particle settings and select from here building fields. And now that's empty, there's nothing in this building fields. So the effector collection is selecting these builder fields, or we've selected that, but there's nothing in there to force the buildings to move, to rotate, to do anything. So in theory, if we go back to the first frame and click play, our buildings will now stay still, like what we want, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Basically, we've created two collections. One collection has the field wind inside of it, and we assign that specifically to only affect the sphere emitter here, right? Then we created another empty collection called building fields, and we assigned that to the effector collection here, but it has nothing inside of it, so nothing will happen to the buildings, basically. Okay, so let's click on this sphere particle fields here, and what we'll do, just to finish this off, let's have a little think here. What we'll do is let's click on this sphere particle fields. Let's press Shift and A, and let's insert another force field, which will be a turbulence. And with this turbulence, let's set this to, see if my memory is any good, -64, and let's set this to 6.6. So my memory is pretty good today. Okay, so these are the same sort of position as this other field, right? Exactly the same. So this field here, we want to name it, or this field, we want to name it field TUR for turbulence, and let's click on its physics and set that to 25. And let's go back and let's middle mouse click and rotate around to the front here, and let's just click play. And now we can see our particles being emitted, right, flying towards the camera like this. Maybe that wind is a bit too strong. Maybe seems to be flying pretty far, right? So maybe we should just leave it like that. I'm not sure. Let's have a think. Okay, so I think what we'll do, let's pause this. We'll go to the turbulence. Let's set that to a high value. Let's set that to something like 60. And let's press 0 on our keyboard. Now we can see what the camera sees. And we'll click play. And now we can see these particles flying towards the camera. And we're going to rotate around. And by the time we get to the end of this camera movement, the particles will fade out and stop being emitted, right? We specified that in our particle animation or settings. So let's go back to frame 60. We need to finish a few things here. So at the moment, the particle system for the sphere emitter here, inside here, the render as halo. So these halos are like temporary particles. Think of them that way. They don't actually render out in the final animation. So we have to actually create some particles or create a particle that we can assign here and use that as the render inside the animation. So what we'll do is press Shift A and we'll insert another mesh, and it will be a UV sphere. UV sphere here. Let's go to its settings and we'll set the Y to, in fact, what we'll do is zoom out a little bit. Let's just click outside here, click on this sphere, and what we'll do, where's it gone? It's in here. So let's drag that out, this sphere here. Let's call it sphere particle, and let's drag that up to the collection at the top here. Now this sphere particle, we want to let's zoom out a little bit. We want to drag it up here out of the camera view. Let's zoom out more. Let's drag it way up here, so there's no way it's going to get rendered in our scene. And let's press the letter N on our keyboard. That opens up this transformer again. This time we want to lock the camera around that sphere up here. So that will be the particle sphere. So that will be sphere particle down here. Let's click that, and then let's middle mouse click, and we're right here on this sphere now, right? And it's above our scene down here. So let's zoom into this sphere. Let's go to the material. Let's click new material, and we'll call it sphere particle. And we'll click here, and we'll go to emission, and we'll set that to 5, maybe a bit more. Let's set it to 10. We can change that if we want, and we're going to make it like a blue sort of color, like this. Now let's go back to our sphere emitter, and we're going to use that as the particle. So let's click on sphere emitter, click on the particle settings. Let's scroll down to the render, and inside the render we'll select where is it, object here, and instance object, we'll select sphere particle, and we want to, let's turn on random scale as well here. And now let's press 0 on our keyboard. That takes us back to the camera view. Let's press N on our keyboard to close down the transformer tool. Let's zoom in. This box is showing us what the camera sees, right? So we can zoom in a bit more. And let's click play. Now we should see blue particles. Let's turn off our overlays. We can see things a bit more clearly. And I think that is looking pretty good. Do you think we should do a camera blur at the end? Is it worth it? I kind of like the way it's working right now. I think it's cool. I think we'll leave it as it is. We could do this sort of camera blur effect at the end as well, but I don't think it's necessary. So we're pretty much done apart from render now. I don't think we need to do much more. You can go ahead and play around with the colors and change them. What I would advise you to do is go to File, Save As, and save it as a new version. So let's save it as version 10 from in my example, and then let's click Save here. And if you want to change any of the color schemes, go to frame 60. Always go to frame 60 because you can see the scene, you can see the particles, you can see the buildings, you can see all the colors of the buildings, and you can see the land, and you can see the sunlight, or whatever you want to call it, this light source in the background. So this is a perfect place to change all of your colors so you can see everything. So let's do one example of changing these colors, and then we'll render out the animation at the end. So let's go to File, Save. This is version 10, and we might end up rendering out version 9, but we saved it as a separate file, right? So if we do anything in here we don't like it, we can always go back to version 9. One thing I might do here is quickly go to these buildings, click on the building, go to the material, and click on the building's light, and let's set this to like 150, and let's go to the building 2 and set that to 150, and go to building 3 and set that to 150. Now these are much brighter, you can see. So as our camera moves towards these objects, they're going to glow more. I think that looks a bit better. Power them up a bit, and then you can change the colors. I'll quickly show you how to do this. Let's just give you a quick example. So obviously we're in the buildings here, so we can click on any of these buildings. We can even click on the building main material, and we should be, I don't think we're going to see much difference though, because it's very, very dark here. I don't think that's, and there's no texture on this, so that's probably why we're not really seeing any sort of coloration in here. But we could change the roughness, and that would affect the building, what can be seen on this building, right? So now you've got like these light effects down the side of the building. So you may want that, may not want that. I'm going to kind of turn that off. I'm going to leave it at 0.3 because I like these black silhouettes. I think that looks pretty cool. So we'll leave the main building material alone. We'll click on light 1, and let's change that to something like yellow. Or let's go green, right? Let's go green, and then we'll click on building 2, click on its color. Let's change that to maybe like a, let's go for like a blue color. And then building 3, you can click on here, and you can change that to some other sort of blue or some green or neon yellow or whatever you like, right? It's entirely your choice. So we'll leave it sort of around here. So we've got 3 different colors. I don't think these colors work very well, but I'm just showing you how to change them. If you go to the sunlight, click on the sunlight and change its color, then you can make some real sort of dramatic changes to this scene, right? You can change its color. Then you can go to the spotlight, click on that, and then click here and change its color as well. Change that to green, and now you've kind of got a different color scheme. I think this looks terrible, to be fair, but what we'll do is go to File, Open. We'll save that version 10, and we'll click version 9 and open that, and let's go back to our render view, and now you can see our other color scheme. So these colors work really well. I guess you got to pick the right colors, and then you're going to get a nice sort of end result. So try and get them colors to complement well. Let's go back to the first frame. Let's go to our render settings in here, and let's just make sure everything is set up here correctly. You want to set the tile size here to 2. 64 samples should be fine. So what we might do is, in fact, one thing we must always do, yeah, don't make this mistake. Click on the building land emitter here, go to the particle settings, and go to the, you have to bake the cache, right? So save this first, save it, open up the cache here, and click bake all dynamics, and then click on the sphere emitter and click bake all dynamics as well. If you don't do that, when you render, you will find your buildings probably won't show and your particles won't show in the final video clip, and that can be very annoying if it takes quite some time to render all this stuff out, right? So this is looking pretty good. Something don't look quite right here though. Have we made a mistake? Because these should have been glowing, right? These spheres, and they're not glowing. So let's go back to the sphere emitter, and let's just make sure that doesn't seem to be selected. Let's click here. What do we do here? we changed the wrong one, not buildings. So that's okay. Okay, so let's click on this sphere emitter here. I thought we changed this, I'm pretty sure we did, but maybe we made a mistake here somewhere. Okay, let's click on sphere emitter. Let's go to file save, in fact. And what we need to do is delete the bake here. Let's scroll down, and in here we want to select, I'm sure we did this, but let's select object here. And in here we'll select, where is it? It's going to be called maybe, okay. We lost our particle somewhere. Sphere particle fields. Maybe we saved that in that last version. We didn't save it in this version. Maybe I should just make it again quickly. It wouldn't take long. So we put it up here somewhere, didn't we? So I don't see it. Let's turn on our overlays. Let's just go into here. It's definitely disappeared. That's annoying. Okay. Let's click render view. We'll make it again. It takes 2 seconds, right? So we'll click on the collection up here. We'll press Shift A, and for some reason that it may have been saved in version 10 but not 9 for some reason. I can't remember. But let's click UV sphere. Let's drag that up. Remember, we drag this up here like this. We press N on our keyboard, and we're going to lock it to the this sphere here, so we can rotate around that sphere. Where is it? It's rotating around the wrong one. So let's see, where is it gone? It is up here. Doesn't seem to rotate this. Let's call it sphere. Let's call it sphere particle. Particle will be easier to find. Then in this drop down, let's select sphere particle here, and now we can rotate around that object. We can find it. Where is it? It's up here. Okay, Blender is doing something a bit weird here. Here it is. Zoomed in too close. Okay, so let's click on this. So we're rotating around this object basically, so we can see it clearly. That was the objective. Let's save this. I don't want to lose it again. Let's click on it. Let's go to the material. Let's click new material. We'll call it sphere particle. Let's paste that in here. I'm curious. Yeah. So we do have a sphere. Okay. Let's click here. Let's go to emission. Set it to 10. I remember setting this to 10. So I don't know what happened to it. And then let's go back to the sphere emitter. Let's click on the particle settings. Let's go to the render as object, and we're going to select sphere particle. We can even see them down there now. Let's press 0. Let's go back. Let's turn off our overlays and press N on our keyboard to close that down. And now we can see the spheres, and they're glowing and they're floating towards the camera. That's what we wanted. So there was some problem between version 9 and 10, I think. We forgot to save something or do something. But anyway, we fixed it. If it's broken, we'll fix it. So we want to bake this now. So let's make sure we bake it. Click sphere emitter. Go up to the top and click bake all dynamics. So it's going to bake the position of these particles. So when it renders, it will render them correctly. Let's click on the land one, and let's click bake all dynamics on that one as well. Just make sure you click bake all dynamics, and in theory we should be able to move to like frame, let's move to like frame 80. Let's press Ctrl S to save and press F12. Let's render out this one frame. Let's make sure we see buildings and make sure we see particles. If we see buildings and particles in the light correctly, then in theory all of our 300 frames should render out fine. And this all looks fine. We see the buildings, we see the particles, and we see the light source. So we're good to render out now. Let's save this, quickly save it. Let's go to our output. Let's set it to 30 frames as it was before. Let's click here and do AVI JPEG. And we'll click on the open folder. Let's go to my desktop. We'll go into this folder here and click accept. It's going to save that onto the folder on my desktop. Press Ctrl and F12 and give it about 15-20 minutes and we should have everything rendered out. So I'll let this render out and I'll pause the video for now. We'll come back and check the final animation. Okay, so Blender's finished rendering out all of the 300 frames. So let's close this down. Let's go to File, Save, and let's go back to the first frame here. So back on our first frame. Let's minimize this and open up this folder. Inside this folder we've got this AVI file and we can watch the video sequence and we can work out what we need to fix if there's anything to fix in here. So overall I like the actual design. I think it's pretty cool. It's very sci-fi, isn't it? And it looks like these almost look like molten rocks or something in this scene. I like the buildings. Maybe we should have made variations of this building. We copied 3 of the same, right? We could have made 3 different styles of building. We don't have to have them all exactly the same. Some could have been wider, some could have been taller, maybe different shapes. That's just down to the particle system that we created for the buildings or the particles themselves. Each one of these buildings was a particle. The only other issue I can see is if I pause this and let's go back a few frames. So like here you can see quite a lot of dark shadows here. This is where I believe the particles are flowing in front of the light source, and sometimes as we're moving through these frames you'll see these flickers. So the shadow that's been casted off this building, I think that looks pretty cool. But at some point here you'll see these sort of lights, these shades here coming off, and these are from the particles themselves. I don't think it matters too much because the thing moves, you know, the scene's moving quite quick, so you don't really notice that. If we play it again, you will see like all of these flashes of dark shadows in the background. A little bit distracting. The only other option is really to remove the particles or position them in a different location so that you don't really see that. Maybe have them a bit higher up or have them over the side here or have them in a different location so they're not flowing exactly over the light source, or move the light source up. But I like the shadow being casted off of this building. I think that's very cool. The other thing is on the very last frame here, on the very last frame you can see the buildings disappear. That's because we set the buildings to in our settings. Let's just go and check our settings quickly. So if we go back to frame 300, we actually see the buildings here in the scene, but on frame 300 in our animation sequence they disappear, right? So to fix that we would go to the buildings particle system here, open up the particle system. Let's go to the, where is it, land buildings emitter, right? Go to the particle system and set the lifetime here to 310 or something like that. Set it to a higher number than 300. If you set it to 300, it's on the very last frame, and that seems to cause a problem. You have to go maybe a few frames forward, maybe set it to 310, something like that. Shouldn't make a problem anyway. And then that very last frame we should see the buildings in the very last frame as well. But apart from that, I'm pretty happy with the end result. Took quite a bit of time to go through this tutorial. I'm doing this on the fly, by the way, so I'm not really preempting a lot of this stuff. I'm trying to build these things as I go along. I kind of like working like that rather than, you know, making a tutorial first and then redoing it again afterwards. I like to just do these things on the fly. That's why it takes, these videos tend to be a bit longer, but you can see all the mistakes that are being made and how I correct those mistakes. That's what a lot of videos don't seem to do. You know, you just go from A to B and you don't see all of the problems in between. So you end up not knowing how to resolve things when you're going to build something in Blender or any other software that I do tutorials on. if there's mistakes in there, I like to keep those mistakes and then show you how I fix them. That way I think you'll learn more as well. So let's go to File, Save. I think overall we've done pretty well. Let's just watch it one more time and then we'll call that tutorial done. Let's just set this on repeat. So here you go. And again, you can choose any other color schemes you want. It doesn't have to be these particular color schemes. You can play around with the color schemes as well, and experiment with the materials, and you can do quite a lot of things in here, right? So let's close this down. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial and I look forward to seeing you on the next DCP web tutorial.